Namaste, welcome back to Mindful Serenity Yoga, or Waking Up in a Busy World. And we're going to continue answering some questions from the jar. And I will reach in and go right ahead and pull out a question. I think they're all tangled up. There's many, many questions in there. And I'll start my timer. And the question is, what is the difference between the psyche and the real self? What is the difference between the psyche and the real self? Take a deep breath. It's snowing out there right now, getting a bit of a storm. Anyway, what is the difference between the psyche and the real self? And this kind of goes with the question I answered recently related to the heart chakra or the heart space. And of course the psyche, think of psychology, psychiatry, the field of the mind, when the psyche is the mind. And the real self is the entity, if you want to use the word entity, within us that observes the mind. And I guess that would be the real difference. The psyche is the mind and all the mind stuff, and the real self is the entity that observes the mind. So yoga is a process of coming to terms with the real self, of reconnecting or becoming aware and experiencing directly the real self. While the psyche is believed to be, in yoga terms, the mind, which is full of what Patanjali, a famous yogi, or the yogi people most think of when they think of the beginning of yoga, what Patanjali referred to as the mental modifications. All the things, all the clouds, all the disturbance, all the grasping and clinging, all the ideation, all the illusions that we create in the mind that get in the way of us experiencing and knowing directly the real self. So yoga is a process of working our way through those mental formations, mental clouds, so that we can get to the real self, which is like the background or the sky on which these clouds develop. I know that gets a little complicated. Psychology and psychiatry, psych meaning mind, comes from the field, a different type of study of the mind. They focus mostly on how we behave and how we act and the thoughts that are going on in our head and how that influences our emotions and how that emotions influence our behavior. They do not go as far as seeing it as a veil over which we understand the real self. So the psyche is a very important part of who we are. You know, without our minds, without these tools, and that's what a mind is, a tool, right, to help us navigate here on this planet, in this existence. Without that tool, we'd be lost, because the tool helps us to navigate, it helps us to make plans, it helps us to think our way through danger, it helps us to solve problems, it helps us to determine what it is we need in order to survive. It is probably more connected to the primal level of a human being than the real self would be. It is mental, I guess it's only one way to think of it. And when we think of the psyche, it's not just the thoughts that go into our heads. It's our feelings, right? It's our emotions. It's the choices we make. It's the way we perceive the world and view the world. It is how that affects how we speak and what we have to say, and our livelihoods, and our ability to concentrate and be mindful. And those things I just mentioned there are loosely the Eightfold Path of Buddhism, you know, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right volition or intention, right concentration, right mindfulness. There is so much to the psyche, and we have to understand, I guess, that who we really are is independent of the psyche. It is like the observer that watches the mind and watches the body and watches the world around us. not making judgments, not having expectations, not dependent on what's going to happen next. It's the part of us that simply observes. So I always like to think of the real self as the observer. But so lost are many of us in our psyche, so lost are many of us in our thoughts and what it tells us we are, how it manipulates us and pulls us away from this inner knowing by, creating fear, making us believe that we are individual bodies and minds in a very dangerous, harsh world, and survival is everything. It takes us away from our peace, in a sense, because the ego, which I think was referred to first, Hinduism, or I know it's often referred to in yoga and the Gita, but the ego is this false idea of self we have, this little meanness, this is who I am, and this my role, my name, my personality, what I do, the way I look, what I have, what I don't have, how I move around in this world is who we are, when it's not. That's the psyche's doing. The real self is who we are, below all that illusion. And Ramana Maharshi, who was a saint in India, that many people went to because he had an approach to understanding life that was certainly based on the Vedas and the Hindu tradition to some degree, and on yoga, but he had a way of dismantling the psyche, not really dismantling, but getting below the psyche through a process of what he called self-inquiry, asking the question, who am I? In meditation, every second of your day, who am I really? When you find yourself doing something and you're lost in what you're doing, or you're lost in your role, or someone says something to you that's harsh and you feel it as an attack against your little meanness, and you're feeling the sting of that, or feeling like you need to defend and protect that little me. He said that's a time to just take a step back from what you're experiencing, from the external world, or from the thoughts in your head, or the feelings that are going on in your body. Step away and just observe it. The psyche is all your reaction to everything that's going on and what your mind says to it. But if you can take a step back and view what's happening around you with a little distance between you and it, you're going to connect. You're automatically kind of going to fall back into that real self as the observer. And you're going to see things differently. You're going to see a separation between the psyche and the real self. You're going to realize you are not your thoughts. You are not this idea you have of yourself. You are not the body you're in. You're not, all your belief systems. You're not the roles you play. You are something much deeper. By asking that question, who am I, we can fall into the real self and disentangle ourselves from the psyche, which is, we tend to be very, very entangled in. Many of us will go through life without ever, ever getting an inkling of that real self. We'll just, be so caught up in what the psyche's doing, so caught up in our thoughts and our anxieties and our fears, so caught up in the things we need to do in this world to succeed, in our defending and our attacking, because we see ourselves as separate, that we may never, ever really grasp the real self that lies beneath the psyche. But once we realize that there is a distinction between psyche and real self, we can begin this journey toward self-inquiry, this journey toward getting to the deeper I. A spiritual quest, some people would refer to it as, or a taming of the mind, other people would refer to it as, taming the psyche. We're not going to get rid of the thoughts. We're not going to get rid of the idea, the thoughts and the feelings and whatnot. They're part of being human. We're not going to get rid of our need to do, to some extent. But if we can view the world through the real self rather than the psyche, then we're going to see a totally different perspective amongst humanity. We're going to see a totally different approach to the world. That real self recognizes that it is not a separate entity. The real self realizes that body lines and borders do not distinguish it from any other being. sentient or non-sentient on this planet, that we're all connected by some invisible essence, some great source of everything that is the spaciousness or the sky on which the mental formations of psyche are formed. So it's like a stepping back beyond the foreground of our existence to the deep background of our existence, beyond the clouds, the psyche formations or the mental modifications that potentially refer to them as, to the spacious sky that we are. Well, that's what I have to say about that. My time obviously has run out. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a wonderful day. Namaste.